It is 11 a.m. on a Sunday in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I am headed to brunch.
It's an unusual scene for me because where I grew up, the type of dedication I'm showing to eggs was reserved for this. Church, where the enthusiasm comes from food for the soul and not the stomach. Today, fewer people in the United States are keeping the faith. Protestants no longer make up the majority of U.S. adults. Yet discussions about evangelicals seemingly dominate the political landscape.
We're going to protect Christianity.
The right to keep and bear arms, it's not bestowed by man, but granted by God.
And Christians overwhelmingly made up the majority of Congress in 2016. So how does this national focus on Christians affect their perceptions, their politics, their beliefs, and the nation?
So I believe that many people believe evangelicals are part of a political party rather than a subset of the Christian faith.
The word evangelical is sort of been hijacked and has become to be known as more of a right-wing, purist type of political term.
Hey fam, I'm Imaeyen, this is AJ Plus, and this Sunday we've traveled in hopes of finding out what it really means to be an evangelical and whether faith and politics should be interwoven. Only 6% of adults in the U.S. are evangelicals, and yet the candidates and the news media were obsessed with them, and they still are.
How much support do you think Trump actually has within the evangelical community?
God bless the great state of Florida.
It's revenge of white America. It is revenge of evangelical right-wingers.
And I noticed a curious thing. Whenever I would hear the word evangelical, it was almost always synonymous with white Christians.
And a series of campaign controversies didn't stop him from winning 81% of the white evangelical vote.
This overwhelmingly white depiction of evangelicals is vastly different from what I had known growing up as a kid in the South. These images made me question the actual definition of evangelical and who gets to be one. Are they evangelical? Or them? To be evangelical means different things to different people, and that's part of the reason why it's so difficult to define the term. To get a better understanding of the term evangelical and the people who identify as such, I visited one of the most Bible-minded cities in America, Houston, Texas. That's where I met Avis Blake Thomas.
Evangelical Christian really is, in my opinion, about the basic doctrines, the basic beliefs, the core beliefs of Christianity. Evangelical Christian, to me, is a little bit of redundancy because every Christian knows that one of the key components of being a Christian is to spread the good news, to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Blake Thomas is a pastor and co-founded the Open Bible Academy, a nonprofit organization that gives free theological biblical training. She says she's seen the word evangelical be co-opted.
You have people that identify as evangelical, but don't share evangelical belief. I am an evangelical. But not from a political viewpoint. I'm an evangelical from the basic understanding of what it means for the Christian faith.
She believes many of the people identified as evangelicals are totally unfamiliar with the Bible, the tenets of the Christian faith, and the history of evangelism.
In most cases, Christians in America, particularly today, don't have a good understanding of the Bible. So they don't know what they believe. They don't understand that it's more than going to a 2-hour service on Sunday.
The evangelical movement began as a populist revolt in the 18th and 19th centuries. It was anti-intellectual and anti-elitist, and it was often spread by untutored preachers who used common storytelling to spread their message. And then a little quirky decade called the 1980s happened. The 80s are when a former actor named Ronald Reagan, who was divorced and rarely attended church, watched as an alliance between the Republican Party and religious leaders emerged, one that helped him win the White House.
It was a political act by the political right which created the religious right. It was politically created for the sake of the Republican Party.
Christian writer and evangelical Jim Wallace says the GOP's plan was a concerted effort.
Literally, there were operatives, political operatives from the right who came to mega church pastors and said, I'll make you a household word, give me your list. And that's how they created the religious right.
Soon, faces like this one became one of those associated with the religious right. That's conservative activist Jerry Falwell, and along with the political action group called the Moral Majority, he pushed for a more conservative religious agenda. The Moral Majority mobilized conservative Christians in politics. Wallace says Falwell's politics and interpretation of the faith represented a major change in how evangelicals were seen. Before Falwell, people like evangelist Billy Graham were the face and the voice of mainstream Christianity in the United States.
Do you love God? Do you love Him with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind?
And by Wallace's definition, this guy is also an evangelical. King spoke frankly about the racial divisions within the American Christian church. And actually, this obelisk behind me is dedicated to his memory outside a modern chapel in Houston, Texas.
I think it is one of the tragedies of our nation, one of the shameful tragedies, that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is one of the most segregated hours, if not the most segregated hours in Christian America.
50 years after King's assassination, the exact same problem still plagues the American Christian church, racial division, according to Wallace. And we saw that firsthand in the aftermath of the 2016 election cycle, when the vast majority of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump, but the majority of evangelicals of color didn't.
Evangelicals, if they're going to be really evangelical, should name and denounce racism as a sin from their pulpits. How many white churches have done that?
You're a chosen race. You're not a black Christian or a white Christian. You're a Christian who's white or a Christian who's black.
Pastor Icky Soma says part of what keeps the church divided is the variation in how black and white parishioners see the world.
For many white evangelical Christians and black evangelical Christians, the way that they view the world is different, even though they read the same Bible and trust the same Jesus. The lenses that we study the Bible through is colored by our culture.
Soma is a Japanese-born U.S. citizen who grew up attending mostly white churches and was naturalized 15 years ago. He doesn't identify as either a Republican or a Democrat, but says he's seen how politics is intersected with religion. In fact, when you hear the term evangelical, you're probably more likely to see it presented this way.
Jesus himself gave us the flu shot.
A person for their Christian convictions is going to be put in jail because they refuse to bow to a decision that is suspect at best.
You're going to be held seriously to account by God if you don't vote.
The word evangelical has a different meaning in the United States than it does internationally, according to Wallace. And he says that's because the U.S. does a poor job of representing people of color in general. In fact, there are more than 2 billion Christians worldwide, according to Pew. That's about a third of the global population. And Christians are so widespread that no one region can claim to be the center of global Christianity. About 26% of Christians live in Europe, 37% in the Americas, and sub-Saharan Africa is home to 24% of the population. For Wallace, being a Christian means a commitment to the Bible, Jesus, and the poor.
America first, for example, is a heresy. It's not America first, it's Jesus first. But if our gospel isn't good news to the poor, it is not the gospel of Jesus Christ, period. And white evangelicals in America are not known to have a gospel that is good news to the poor.
The Bible also has 2,000 verses about the poor compared to just 12 on homosexuality, according to Wallace. But you've probably heard much more about those verses on homosexuality in news coverage.
We're talking about marriage. We're talking about an institution that has survived and served this civilization for over 5,000 years with one definition.
You are never going to stop AIDS until you stop treating homosexual sodomy as a civil right and start treating it as a form of conduct to avoid.
Do these types of depictions really mean that the news media doesn't understand religion? Wallace thinks so, and he says that the news media's portrayal of faith is a big part of the problem.
Media who are not very faith-friendly like to paint Christians in the worst possible way. And so, if you make religious right synonymous with Christian or evangelical synonymous with white evangelical, that makes Christians look bad.
If the media does have a religious literacy problem, it's not alone. Americans don't know much about religion. Pew Research says that those most likely to be knowledgeable about religion in the U.S. have an advanced college degree. This lack of understanding may explain the public's perception, a perception that makes it much more difficult for self-identified Christians, according to Blake Thomas.
Those of us who are true evangelicals get a bad rap because they see the evangelical term used in the political sphere. The challenge is that in the marketplace, when people hear the term evangelical and they then see how those same people, their values may not match or their understanding does not seem to match ours.
She says she believes it's just one reason why the Christian faith is on the decline in the U.S.
When you have people that just simply identify with it from a political standpoint, they don't bring to the table those same sets of beliefs. They see it as political expediency versus a belief system, versus a part of religion.
So how do evangelicals go about fixing what seems to be a public relations problem? Well, the first thing could be realizing that faith doesn't have a political party.
We shouldn't be religious right or religious left. I don't take that on either. We should be Christians. It's Jesus first.
And just because you're evangelical, it doesn't mean that you don't struggle with understanding issues of identity, race, gender, and sex.
The Christian can still struggle with sins like racism, prejudice, and things like that. So I would say the place that the church has in politics is encourage their members to be upright citizens.
Either we're Christian or we're not, and we will be known by our fruit that we bear.
Hey fam, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I want to know whether you think evangelicals are accurately represented in news media. Let us know, and don't forget to come back next week when we have another awesome video. Bye.